So today is less of a hack and just more of proper cleaning of a saddle, especially if you have a good saddle and you want to keep good leather. Then this is just the steps of cleaning a saddle to keep it in good condition. So the first thing I'm going to do is drop the stirrup bar latch, take the stirrups off, and I'm just going to hang them on the back of the saddle rack so I can clean the saddle properly. And we will do the stirrup leathers as well. And then the first step with any saddle is not to start with the soap, but to start with just plain water. So I have a little bucket of plain water and a clean towel. And what I'm going to do is try to get some of the excess water out of the towel. And I'm just first going to go over the saddle, especially if the saddle has mold or a lot of grime or it hasn't been cleaned in a while. I'm just going to go over the saddle with plain water and a clean cloth and just wipe the dirt off. I'm going to start with the underside, do the panels and the channel, and especially the flaps, which is this part of the saddle, and the billet straps, which is where the girth attaches, because that's where the horse's sweat can ruin the leather. So I'm just going to give it a quick wipe down. I usually put a saddle pad over the rack, which helps it dry a little faster. And I'm just going to get all the dust. A little bit of elbow grease, but nothing other than plain water. And you want to get under everything, in the crevices, get all the grease and the dirt wiped off first, especially in these little channels where it loves to get stuck. And this is, I'm showing it on an English saddle. This is a training saddle, but it's the same process no matter the saddle you're using, even Western saddles. This is how I go about cleaning them. If they're really filthy, then you take your time with this step of getting most of the dirt off with just a damp cloth and a little bit of rubbing. And if your water doesn't get too dirty, then we can use that for the soap as well. So I don't want too much water on the leather, just a damp cloth without being too wet. Okay, so once the saddle is all wiped down, the next step is going to be to soap it up. And just plain saddle soap, nothing fancy. What ends up ruining leathers are fancy cleaners that have either mineral oil in them or petroleum products. So to really keep the leather healthy, pure glycerin soap, and what I did was I bought a bar. I like to break off a hunk of the bar and put it in this little dish, because then when I wet it down, it's easier to use. So I'm going to wet the sponge. I got a new sponge instead of using my nasty old dirty one. Squeeze the excess water out of the sponge. Well, I'm going to need a little more than that on a new sponge. And then I like having these round containers because you can just sort of make a circular motion. You want to suds it up a little bit. You don't want too much extra water, so I'm going to squeeze out excess and keep filling the sponge mostly with the glycerin soap. So you can still buy bars of glycerin saddle soap pretty much any feed store. Oops, and I forgot to flip the saddle again. So again, I'm going to start on the underside of the saddle. On a Western saddle, the underside is fleece, so you might only have to clean the channel. And I'm going to rub the soap right into the clean saddle. And just go over the bottom of the saddle again. and leave all the suds sort of showing. I'm just going to keep wiping it down with a damp sponge and a lot of soap. So what the saddle soap does is it actually feeds the leather as well as cleaning it. So it's a bit of a leather conditioner as well as a cleaner, right? So the more soap we put on, the better. And the billet straps only get soap and are never conditioned, because conditioning the billet straps can make them too soft and break easier or not be stable enough for the girth. So the billet straps, I usually put a little bit of extra soap on. Or on a Western saddle, it would be your latigo leathers, maybe your back cinch. But what the soap will do is soften the leather, feed the leather, clean the leather. We're going to wipe off all the excess to get it clean. And it gives the leather a little bit of that lovely tacky quality that feels kind of sticky when you sit in it. So plain old saddle soap, glycerin soap, always the best and the safest for your leather products. And this saddle wasn't too dirty. All of the steps are the same, but they might take a bit longer if the saddle has really not been cleaned in a while, has gotten really wet or dirty, or gotten a bit of mold, which can happen especially in humid conditions. And you can see almost as fast, because I wiped it down with a damp cloth first, almost as fast as I'm putting the soap on, it's sort of soaking into the leather. So it's only leaving a little bit of residue. And I want to go over the stirrup bars with the soap. That's what keeps them smooth and functional. Or any hardware. The soap will act to sort of keep it operating smooth and seamless. Now the flaps, especially where our sweaty legs go, always needs a little bit of extra soap and a little bit of extra conditioning. And if you have a black saddle, like I do, and you ride in a very sunny climate, like I do in Florida, then it's really easy for black saddles to fade and start to get sort of a reddish color the more they're out in the sun while you're actually riding. So here I'm going right over the stirrup bar, under the leather, through here, just soap, 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 soap. Grab the suds. And so one of the keys to keeping a black saddle black is not only regular soaping, but regular conditioning. So we're going to go over how to condition, because black saddles in sunny locations only stay black if they're conditioned pretty regularly and cleaned pretty regularly. The conditioning sort of restores the blackness of the leather. Okay, so as soon as I get all this soap on the saddle, I'm going to take a dry cloth, and you can see almost as soon as I finish putting it on, most of it is soaked in, and I just have this white residue all over the saddle. So go back underneath, And all I'm going to do is take a dry, reasonably clean cloth, and I'm going to start wiping all that residue off the saddle. So as I'm wiping off the soapy residue, so I don't have these white blotches all over my saddle, it's pulling dirt off with it. So as I'm rubbing, I'm picking up more dirt, cleaning the leather, but more importantly with the saddle soap, feeding the leather. So anything that cleans without conditioning can really dry out the leather, and mineral oil-based products, petroleum-based products can actually change the structure of the leather. So if you have a nice leather saddle, no matter what kind, you want to make sure that you're using pure glycerin soap to clean and plain water, and that you're using a conditioner, which we'll go over in a second, that is mostly animal product based. So you can use neat's foot oil, anything with tallow in it. The particular ones that I like are the Passier, which I'm going to use today, and Hennig, the saddle company Hennig makes a very good one, called Leather Balsam. And I think Dover sells a really good one called Oak Bark Leather Conditioner. So during this phase is when I want to sort of take my fingers and get into those seams, and it's going to pull out all that extra dirt just by getting the soapy residue out of there. So I used a white towel so you could kind of see how I don't need to wet the saddle down with the soap, and I don't need all the soap off the saddle in order to clean it. I just have to get the residue off of there. And as I wipe it with a clean, dry cloth, it pulls off a lot more dirt. So like I said, this is less of a hack, but I get asked a lot about saddle cleaning, and there's a lot of gimmicks and products out there that aren't actually great for really good leather. And when you pay for good leather and good saddle design, you want to know how to take care of it. So again, I'm just getting in the crevices, wiping off all that soapy residue. We should probably speed this up to 2x speed. There we go. And the saddle didn't look that bad to begin with, but there's a lot of dirt coming off of the saddle, which can happen every ride. So you can really only condition saddles. You don't want this leather to become too soft or too slippery. With black saddles, you have to condition the saddle more often than brown saddles, but you can soap a saddle, which is now done on this saddle. So the first 2 steps I just showed, you could do on a saddle after every ride, and it would only preserve your leather and keep your saddle looking great for years. So you could stop there if you're happy with the condition of the leather, or if you don't have a black saddle, you could stop there. So then the next step is adding a conditioner. So I keep the sponge in there because it gets all oily. And the Passier Leather Balsam, leather balm, is just the German word, but it's usually made with tallow type products. So neat's foot oil, different saddle makers that use animal fat in the products is what you want. You do not want anything synthetic in your leather conditioner. It's usually pretty greasy. This one's yellow and pretty oily. You don't need a lot on your sponge, right? So then I just repeat the process And this time, my saddle isn't in too bad of shape. So I'm just going to add a very light coat by wiping the sponge over the leather. And the only part of the saddle that I don't condition either at all, or if I do, very rarely, are these billet straps. Because like I said, if those get too soft, they can break from the force of the girth on the horse during motion. So those are a soap-only part of the saddle. But the rest of the saddle can have a really good condition. And just that little bit of conditioner I put on this sponge is doing the whole bottom of the saddle. So a light condition keeps the saddle sort of tacky, keeps the leather soft, keeps black saddles black, without getting too gummed up. I have had clients that oversaturated their riding equipment with conditioner, and it's terrible to use. It gets slippery, it gets too soft, it's not comfortable to use when you're riding. So here I skipped the billet straps, but that little bit of conditioner on my sponge was plenty for the whole bottom of the saddle. So then I'm going to flip the saddle back over. And I could use a touch more, what do I do with it? Touch more of the conditioner for the top of the saddle, which is where I want it to be a little thicker. So after conditioning the saddle, I like to leave it overnight with the saddle cover on. I have the luxury of air conditioning in my tack room, which really prevents the mold. If you don't have air conditioning, you just want as dry, dark, cool place as possible. And the saddle cover that typically comes with the saddle just keeps the dust off of it and keeps it clean, especially after conditioning.